All right, we can begin. I can do a small introduction, and you can take it from there.
Sure, thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sami Ayad. I'm an internal communications manager at Al-Fihri Open University. And today we are having our guest speaker, Ms. Celina Del Felice, and she'll be talking about hate speech. Ms., you can begin.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It is my honor to be joining you this afternoon. So good afternoon to everyone. Good morning if there's anyone still in the morning somewhere in the globe. So my name is Celina Del Felice. I'm originally from Argentina. I live now in Spain. I live on the Canary Islands, which is very close to the coast of Morocco. And I work for an online university as well, which is the Open University of Catalonia, a region within Spain. I teach in a course, I teach courses on intercultural conflict, ethnic conflict, mediation, within a master's program in peace and conflict studies. And so I'm very pleased. I also work with a lot of youth organizations in peace education topics. So I'm very honored. So I thank you very much again for the invitation. But first, I wanted to know who is joining us. Maybe if through Facebook you can write your name, the city that you live in, and what you're studying, or what you're working, or what your what are your interests. So then through the talk, maybe if you send me a message, then I can get to know you a little bit and adapt my examples. You can ask questions about anything that I say, and I really hope that we can have a bit of an exchange. I have a presentation of about 20 minutes, 30 minutes maximum, depending how it goes. And but feel free later to make any questions. I don't know, Sami, if you can share my slides, or if how do I share my slides? Or how do
yes, I can open your presentation and I'll share my screen now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, maybe if you go to the first slide. Yeah, I miss your faces, and I miss your looks, but we will manage through this thanks to technology. So I wanted to share about an initiative and ways to address hate speech, ways to address it through developing alternative narratives. That means different stories about how we understand the world. And I will do it sharing a lot that has been included in this manual that you see. It's a manual that is called We Can, Taking Action Against Hate Speech Through Counter and Alternative Narratives, which is a manual produced by the No Hate Speech campaign of the Council of Europe. It's a youth-led campaign of many youth organizations in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So a lot of what I'm sharing is in the manual. You can find it online. It's in English, it's in French, and in other languages it's being translated. So you can find also on the website more examples. Maybe if you go to the next slide. So basically, we will start defining hate speech. What is hate speech in general as a crime? In many legislations, it is a crime. And also what it is hate speech online. Basically what we see as expressions of discrimination, mainly in social media, in Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms. Then we will try to explain why we hate, why we discriminate. and then explaining why this approach of addressing, trying to mitigate or stop hate speech through working with educational projects that develop alternative narratives. Counter and alternative narrative, I'll explain the difference between these two. Then I'll explain a little bit about the campaign, the Council of Zero No Hate Speech movement, about the manual, and I want to show you one analytical tool. Maybe ideally, if we were in the same room, we could take one of your examples of an expression of hate speech that you have heard, and then we would analyze it together. But I picked an example, but if you want to, while I'm talking, if you want to share an example that you want us to analyze, we can what kind of hate speech it is, what kind of message it is sending, and how we could address it through building an alternative narrative. And then, of course, some examples, some inspiring examples. Yes, the next one, please. So hate speech, this is as defined by the Council of Europe, it means all forms of expression, what we say, what we write, a graffiti that we write on a wall, on a shop, that spreads, incites, promotes, justifies racial hatred, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, any form of hatred towards a particular group, including forms of aggressive nationalism, ethnocentrism, discrimination, and hostility against minorities, migrants, people of immigrant origin. But basically, it's an expression of hate against a particular group. Maybe then the next one. This is, as I say, it's a definition, and in different European countries, there is legislation that, if you have an expression of hate speech, a discriminatory speech, you can even be taken to court, and this is phrased as a crime. But it's also in the book, in the manual, we also not only talk about hate speech as a legal issue, but as a social issue, as a social phenomenon. So yeah, the next one. So the next one is why we discriminate and hate. So I'm gonna go really back to studies of anthropology that studied why human beings through history became aggressive and violent. And there was a meeting in 1985 of different scientists and researchers about trying to explain to what the origin of violence among humans, and to determine whether it was whether human beings are naturally violent and aggressive. So their conclusion is that human beings can be aggressive when we feel threatened. We react because we still have this instincts, but when war or violence is deliberate, that's learned. That's something that we learn through our cultures. So we tend to be aggressive. We react, for example, when we perceive we are being attacked. But that doesn't mean that we cannot reflect and process those emotions. And, for example, the way our war industry is structured in the world, that's pretty much very planned and deliberate, and that is not natural. So the planned violence is not natural. We have some instincts to aggression, but there are many forms of violence in our society that we have internalized and reproduced through culture. So one of the first, maybe if you can go click, Sami, in the next. So basically, since we are born, we're exposed to experiences, and we develop in our minds, we develop concepts. So our minds, and this you can read more. I can share literature both on this anthropology literature that I'm referring to, and also neuroscience, which our brains, we try to simplify, have some concepts. For example, this one I shared in the slide is a cow, I would say, or it's a bull. So you can have just a few lines, and then most of us would say, oh yeah, it's a cow or it's a bull, because we have the concept internalized. So we get to understand the world around us, and we simplified it into concepts and categories. So we group things, okay, good, bad, apples, animals, and we do that with social groups as well. So maybe Sami, if you continue clicking, so then I have everything. I thought I would do it myself. And then we do, to understand a lot of information, we create these categories and these stereotypes. Oh, those that live on the other side of the river, they are hardworking. So we create simplifications of reality in our minds. And we also develop basic explanations of how reality works. So this we do through stories. And so since humanity is humanity, we develop stories to help us understand how things work and how we should behave. So we observe, okay, if my parents behave in such and such way, I will obey, because otherwise they react in a certain manner. So we have, through the stories, the bedtime stories, through movies, through songs, we develop a view of the world. So yes, if you can continue. So basically these stories are frameworks, mental frameworks that help us understand realities. And sometimes these stories are biased. They are not really balanced. They are developed they have our fears attached to them. So, for example, if there are negative stereotypes about a group, they are very deeply ingrained in not only in our minds, but in our feelings. So if we live in a context, for example, I will tell you one personal anecdote. So Argentina had a conflict in the early 80s against the United Kingdom. So I grew up with a lot of enemy images of the British. And so, of course, they are mean and they are pirates and they steal our land. And so that experience really shaped me. Many years later, when I meet British people, I have some kind of something under my skin still. Though I have many British friends and I speak English and I love the history and the culture, but it's something under my skin. It's really deeply ingrained feelings and emotions of what I went through also with my family in that situation. And I'm sure you can relate to that. So we can rationalize how the others are. We still have these experiences and these stereotypes. If we move one more. Yeah. So another example of how stereotypes are developed. So since we play this, if you Google girls' toys, you will find mostly dolls and blonde dolls, and this is reinforcing the idea that girls should play with, should adopt caretaking roles, and boys, if you go to a toy shop, you find other toys like construction and more war and more weapon toys. So these stereotypes are developed through our upbringing, and they are deeply ingrained. The next one, please. So all these negative, mostly both the positive and the negative stereotypes, they are a bit unavoidable. As I said, is the way our brain manages to process a lot of information. So we need to simplify reality, and then that guides us how we behave. So when we hear hate speech, for example, you people are scum, go home, you refugees are not welcome, or start you are lazy, go home. All these expressions, I must tell you, yesterday I was walking in our neighborhood, and there was a mural on the wall outside of the school. It's the wall of the school, so it's a public building, and there was it's an organization that supports refugees here in Spain, and there was a Palestinian flag with messages supporting Palestinian freedom, and there was a graffiti with some of these words. So this is recent because I passed by. So we see these messages in the public space, we see them online. This message, this sentence, what you see, underlying this sentence, you have a narrative. A narrative is like below the water, you see only the tip of the iceberg, but below you have these perceptions, that these stories that people have in their minds. Our country is being invaded by these foreigners. There is a fear underlying the statement. Below the narrative, there are all these negative stereotypes that feed into the narrative. So foreigners are lazy, they do not integrate, they bring illnesses. Now with the coronavirus we have here on the Canary Islands, a lot of migrants and a lot of this kind of hate speech. And then underlying these perceptions, you have a social and the broader conflicts, societal conflicts, which is economic struggles, unemployment, insecurity, crime. You have many social issues that make people feel more, they have this perception of being threat. So what we see, we see a sentence, but underlying the sentence, there's a whole narrative and a whole explanation. So one of the steps we need to address hate speech, we need not only to understand the sentence, but to understand what is underlying, why are people saying these things. So maybe if we have the next one. So as we said, is why do we hate? So we have these negative stereotypes, these ideas that are they are normalized. Some people are better than others, like racism. And we have identity and security issues, a lack of sense of belonging, fears, a perception that we are being threatened. We have anger, resentment. This is all linked to theories of peace and conflict, the theory of needs of peace scholar Johan Galtung. And when people feel that their security is being threatened, or their security is being based on a really weak identity formation, they feel they don't know who they are, they feel attacked by the others. So, okay, we have all these others coming. Who am I? Why they are threatening my very same existence, the physical and the existence of the culture. They feel that that's a bit how people that hate or have these perceptions feel. They feel they are defending themselves, and then this is all sustained through social systems that allow these perceptions to reproduce themselves. So we have history books, as I said, we have songs, we have social inequality. So the differences are structurally sustained. Maybe we go to the next one. So one exercise I wanted to do with you, and it's hard because I don't know who's following us, is an exercise we do in many peace education courses, which is the identity onion. So I'm going to invite you to try to do it now. I'm going to explain it to you, and then you can do it afterwards when you have a little time, if you feel like it. Basically, you need to describe yourself, who you are, and prioritize and think what is the most important characteristic that defines you. So, for example, I am a woman. That's very important to me, to my identity. I am my language is very important to me. If I couldn't speak my own language, I would feel very very uncomfortable. I'm very attached to it. My community is another, my home community, my profession. So all these layers define me. It can be gender, it can be profession, it can be other characteristics. And imagine what it would feel like if you, for some reason, that aspect of your identity could not be expressed. So imagine if for any situation you're forced to leave your country and then you're not able to speak your language anymore. How would that feel if you lose that layer of your identity? So you can go into that, imagine that from the outer layers through the inner layers. So some things I could live with, and some things I would feel really, shaken and hurt. So think, what is your identity based on? What is important for you? What values you feel are important to you, and you need to express them and make those values be respected. Because the more sure you are about how your identity is complex, and at some moments in time, maybe one aspect is more important than other, some aspects you can compromise and some others not, then that helps you relate to others that have different values and priorities. So this is an exercise I ideally would do, and I love to discuss it with you. And so maybe we share some of the outcomes in the end. But the next one, please. So, but stories, so as I said, stories help us sustain these negative perceptions, and they lower our tolerance for aggression. So if we feel that those people, we define a group and they are mean and they have attacked us in the past, then that allows us to justify an act of aggression. And so the more the negative stereotypes, the lower the tolerance to accept the use of aggression or the use of violence against that. But at the same time, these stereotypes are not unchangeable. We can write new stories, and we can be critical and rebuild and see in all those stereotypes that what is the grain of truth in them, and challenge a bit what are the from the stories that we hear, try to challenge and see what are the facts and what are the fears, what are the biases. So this is I put this picture because I put these pictures of the toys, because these are campaigns. The one before was the Barbies, were used to be always very thin and very all blonde and blue eyes, very one ideal of beauty, not only a model of women but a model of beauty. And this is a campaign which tried to use a role reversal. So how would a blonde girl feel if all the dolls for her choice would not represent her? She would not feel, I'm not there, those dolls are not me. And so there are many of these photographs, I can share them also with you, in which they try to change the story so that people would reflect about these normalized roles. And so it was very interesting to use simply a new narrative can be a picture, just showing that the roles, the characters in the story are adopting a different position or a different role. Maybe the next one. Then a little bit about hate speech online. So it has the same characteristics as hate speech offline, but sometimes it takes a life of its own, because a lot of people can write protected by anonymity, because it's easy to write hurtful messages, and it is very influential among young people. There are a lot of young people are communicate online more and more, and this, when it becomes dangerous, is because when you have these tendencies of them against us, and you have memes and jokes and short videos that appeal to your emotions. And you think it's sometimes it's humor, but there's a fine line sometimes between humor and hurting or attacking a certain specific group. Also extremists, especially, well, both right-wing extremists and religious extremists, they use personalized tactics of contacting other young people in a friendly way, like, okay, I want to be your friend, or using dating tactics. They communicate a lot online. They contact other people online. And they create these groups in which, yeah, mostly young people who are in a feel more vulnerable, they find, I am somebody. Somebody cares about me. I have a sense of belonging to this group and a sense of heroism. Especially, I'm talking about extremist groups who might plan to not only to organize hate speech online, but also offline, like a certain attack to a particular school or group. We've had in Europe attacks to Roma houses, to churches, to mosques. So it's because organized online, these groups these young people find each other online, but sometimes they do actions offline. So there is a fine line between the process of radicalization, which you say, okay, it's all talking, it's all freedom of speech, but at some point it leads to an actual act of violence. Maybe the next one. So yes, this happens a lot in the presidential campaigns in the US. We know how some presidents use Twitter and Facebook. So the regulations for these forms of discrimination are very porous, and there are discussions among governments and these platforms about how to control hate speech. And there has been some progress. There is more control, and there are more people that are overseeing these types of aggressions. But for example, you need to, when you are attacked, personally, you receive, for example, a death threat through Facebook or Twitter, you need to report it. And these cases are dealt on a one-to-one basis. So you need to report. And there are also many trolls. So this is automized. So the response is quite slow, and it has not managed to control the amount of hate speech. This is why, for example, the Council of Europe decided it's not enough. Maybe we go to the next slide, because I think it's the next slide. How we address hate speech, to address it through a legal route is not enough. It's not enough to report it and to ask platforms to limit it, or to cancel accounts when you find someone who's creates even more trolls, for example. So it is a social problem, and so we need to address it also as a social problem. So it is, again, through education, addressing the root causes of the problem, which are these negative stereotypes, enemy images. Maybe we go to if you put the whole slide. So we treat it as a social phenomenon, and from conflict studies, we see the response as having to be conflict prevention and conflict transformation. I would say violence prevention and conflict transformation. And so in the approaches that believe that you can address hate speech, is that you can change those attitudes and you can build up critical thinking among not only young people, but the whole population through education. Is that yes, people can be made more tolerant, they can reflect about their feelings, their identities, their way they react to others, and we can work with those complex identities, we can rehumanize the other. The other may not be there might be many issues that separate us, but still we're all humans. So simply this idea of rehumanizing the other through peace education, human rights education, and of course, new narratives. How in media we have in the Spanish-speaking world, we have telenovelas. I don't know if you know. They are series that are very popular. A lot of people watch them. So from movies, from music stars, from celebrities, all kinds of written literature, we can create different stories about how the world. So this is from conflict theories. We can say we need to work on the underlying conflicts. We need to work at the educational level, and it's possible to change those attitudes. It requires some effort. Maybe the next one. I'm already half an hour, but I hope you're still following. So this is why the Council of Europe, and particularly this youth campaign, decided to use counter and alternative narratives as a tool to address hate speech. As I said, individual reporting through the platforms, through social media platforms is not enough. Individual reporting through the legal systems is also not enough. It's a social problem, so we need to have dialogue about what are the issues that separate us, why we have such animosity. This is going broader in some countries, in some contexts. This is very difficult because we have very polarized societies and conflicts are very much alive, so this is very hard. But nevertheless, we need to try to build peace through new ways of relating to each other. So changing the story is like changing our script, or we change behavior. Maybe the next one. This is the campaign. You can find more online, but the idea is building alternative narratives, non-exclusionary narratives, and human rights-based narratives, creating all kinds of content and occupying the space, offline and online. There are many examples on the website, from lots of murals, so simply painting different kinds of images and messages on where there was graffiti, just creating a new mural together, from all kinds of visual arts stories through that can be shared online. Maybe the next. So I invite you all to check the campaign website. It's there are many national campaigns also outside Europe, or groups that take some of these ideas and get together. This is, for example, on the cover of the book. This is taken in Helsinki, and you see they are repainting a mural with other kinds of images. The manual is very practical. It has more information about how you define hate speech legally, about the phenomenon of hate speech online, what is a narrative, what is a counter and alternative narrative. The difference between these two is that a counter narrative is directly at trying to deconstruct a negative narrative. So it has a direct connection. It tries to prove that some facts that are stated in the hateful narrative are wrong. So it directly engages with the narratives. An alternative narrative is simply a proposal of a different way of relating to one another. So it can speak of human rights. It doesn't have to relate directly to the hateful sentence or the hateful narrative, but it's more open, and it has very nice, like, step-by-step tools. And I want to share only one with you before closing, and one example, but it has all kinds of tips of how you can monitor hate speech through social media, how you can do social analysis in the context that you work, how you can do media analysis. It has a lot of very practical tools. So I hope you can find what you need. But I want to do one example with you of how you deconstruct. You take the pieces apart of a hateful narrative and maybe build a new one. So maybe Sammy, if you press the next one. So I try to simplify it, but basically one of the tools to analyze stories, any kind of message, any kind of narrative, is that a narrative has structure. It has a beginning, a disruptive moment, a cliffhanger, it's called in the series, and then this problem or this conflict in the story is resolved. That's the basic structure of a story. Then you have characters, you have different actors, then you have a context, then you have relations, how these characters are related to each other, and then it has a meaning. So if you analyze these 5 aspects of the story, then you can start to critically analyze, okay, what is this story telling me? So a hateful narrative could be, our country was prosperous, America was great, for example. Then migrants invaded us and took our jobs. And therefore, we must defend our country and foreigners must go up. Very simplified narrative. The characters are the locals, then you have the foreigners. The context is globalization, migrations, economic liberalization, unemployment. Then you have relations between us and them. We have these 2 groups are created in the narrative as 2 separate groups that are, there's a certain distance. And then how these groups relate to each other is this trust, competition, and I would say, yes, mostly distrust and fear. Then you can think of the same history can be seen from an inclusive narrative point of view. So President Obama, for example, he says, yes, we can. And that we was trying to overcome these different smaller we's. We are, all of us are Americans. And our country was prosperous, then there was a demand for labor force, migrants came. Yes, there are issues of coexistence, there are issues of unemployment, but we can work on them together. So it's the same factual situation, but you just see them from a different point of view. And you should not deny the problems. It's not that an inclusive narrative would be a rosy narrative. You must, acknowledge the issues, and that's probably the reason why all these social issues remain unresolved, because the root causes are not addressed. But you can have the same characters, but these characters can be described in a different way. So, for example, the Latino community in the US is always depicted as the drug dealers, the lazy, the uneducated. But if you have stories in which you show that a lot of the Latino community are hardworking people, they are also educated, etc., then you change these perceptions and you allow for a different resolution of the same conflicts. This is in a very nutshell. I just took one example that I think can be relevant for many contexts. This idea of us and them can be depending on the context. Maybe if you share the next. And there are many examples in the manual and on the website of how you create these alternative narratives. But I want you to invite, if you haven't seen it yet, this is a campaign by Amnesty International in which they used a video. They filmed people from different European countries and different refugees living in Europe, looking at each other in the eyes for 5 minutes. And what happened? It was a bit of an experiment, but they tried to put the emphasis on the human connection, on how we are simply human, simply vulnerable, but we are also approachable, and all these myths and fears that sometimes we create are not accurate. And so I really encourage you to watch the video. I felt it's very moving, but this is an example of how you create a different narrative without directly reacting maybe to the attacks, but just showing a different side of the characters in the story. So I hope I have been clear about hate speech, why it happens, this idea of fears that are really part of our human lives, and different ways on how building these different stories can help address those fears and those reasons for becoming aggressive or becoming haters, either face-to-face or online. So I really welcome your comments and your examples and your questions. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't been too long. It's a bit long. Sorry.
It's perfectly all right. Ms. Najat Zawi commented, she said hate speeches are both explicit and implicit in some video content around the world. Reporting these videos is useless, actually, because we notice the increasing number of these videos now. We should move from word to action and reaction. Mechanisms differ from one culture to another culture, and this is what we should work on, even in our narrative. And also she asked, does infidelism have a role in increasing hate
speech? Could you repeat it? I didn't hear you very well.
Does individualism have a role in increasing hate speech? Individualism.
Individualism. If individualism has a role in... Okay, do I answer now or do I take a few questions?
You can answer now, and we're also posting this video later on, and we'll gather all the questions and we can send them to you personally.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you for that comment. Yes, I would agree. I think individualism plays a role in which we are more and more forced to compete and to think, yes, for ourselves. And yes, I think we need to think more of the collective. And it's really very hard balance to strike between respecting individual freedom and rights, which are important, and at the same time the collective, how the group is important. So I think we will have to coexist with this tension between, yes, we need to respect everyone, and at the same time have a feeling of a group. And I think I'm thinking more of the extremist cases, that they felt alone in society and they felt excluded. So becoming part of a group makes them feel more secure. So I would say, yes, that this extreme individualism makes you feel alone and disconnected. And yes, I think you need to keep a dialogue and some connection, some balance between your individual needs, which need to be respected, and forms of expression, and the needs of the collective, and this responsibility that we all have to respect others and to contribute to the well-being of the community. Sometimes we put a lot of emphasis in what we need, but not on the commitment or the responsibility we have as citizens to contribute. So I think it's a balance we need to find. Keep looking for it.
Yeah, and another question is from Tinley Tan. They ask, how do we create the spaces for inclusive narratives, given how communities are increasingly polarized, even in the digital space?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. Where do we start? In the peace building initiatives that we work with, we be very creative and start with those, like with small steps sometimes in very polarized societies. So you start breaking barriers with those that could be closer to be more open to have a conversation. So you first create, for example, groups of medical doctors that from different sides of the situation, and they find, they have something else in common, and then they enter into dialogue about the different issues. So you need to find ways of where you can start dialogue. Sometimes there is no opportunity in the sense that there is a blockage. There's so much going on, so many things you just cannot even talk about it. But there are a few people that are working for peace, and that they feel that despite the many issues at stake, dialogue is the way to overcome the situation. So you start with those that are a bit more open, then you create a small space, for example, civil society organizations that already share the commitment to respect of human rights, for example, have something in common. Then they create kind of safe havens or safe spaces where people with different opinions can express themselves in a safe space and talk about issues. So this is why peace building organizations and youth organizations are so important to create these groups or these spaces where young people or people can feel safe to express themselves. This is very hard in some countries, even with mobility issues before the COVID. And it's mostly through trust. So you first, you have maybe a few people that trust each other, that are the backbones that, organize the kind of meetings or safe spaces for people to talk. And online, there are groups that have moderators. I invite you to be part of the greatest group that I know is the youth working towards, let me see, I will share with you. Now then, is youth transforming the violence of exclusion? That's correct. Youth transforming the violence of exclusion. It has about 6,000 members, and there are moderators. So there are dialogues in which moderation is needed with some ground rules. But that's an online space, global space where young people working in the peace building field, all kinds of sub-issues, they connect and they exchange ideas and so forth. And then the United Network of Young Peace Builders, it's an organization that I used to work for. They organize online dialogue on meetings and courses on these issues, so how to facilitate dialogue. And even more now, in the past months, I know many organizations are developing tools to facilitate dialogue online because of the situation, the pandemic. So I can share them with you. But these two should, if you go to the Facebook page of the United Network of Young Peace Builders, it's a global network of about 200 youth organizations, and their members have activities in all regions. So you can see in your language, maybe sometimes it's easier, different initiatives. Yes. I hope I've answered the question.
Another question is from Mr. Zubair. He asks, does the Council of Europe have any project in hate speech?
Yes, it does. So basically, the campaign that I mentioned is their main educational activity. It was organized by their youth department. This included training courses, and through the European Youth Foundation, then you can apply for small grants to do activities. So, but the campaign has ended, and now there is, the campaign was initiated and coordinated by the Council of Europe, then all the organizations, because it was really a youth-led campaign, decided to create a new platform, a civil society organization. So they continue the campaign, but it's not directly managed by the Council of Europe. So that's the educational work. The educational work, anti-discrimination and hate speech continues. So you can keep checking the website of the European Youth Foundation. And at the same time, the Council of Europe has monitoring tools for hate speech. And so that work continues. And I can also share the websites. And I know one of the colleagues that co-edited the manual with me is still coordinating these actions. So I cannot be super accurate in what they are doing right now because I don't work every day. I don't work for the Council of Europe, but I know they have these two, let's say, two ways of working on hate speech: the monitoring the legal aspects in every member country and the educational work.
Yes, another question from Mr. Goncia Bleon. He asks, how can we create a society of inclusiveness, leaving no one behind?
Thank you for this question. This is a difficult question. I would say we can create a society with a lot of dialogue, really addressing the needs, finding spaces. So we need to listen better. I mean, I'm about the public authorities, and at least in many countries there is a really huge mistrust in public authorities. But I see the state, local governments, national governments as how their role should be of dialogue facilitators. They should be, okay, first of all, assessing the needs of that society, where the fault lines are, where the conflicts are, and then being very creative and effective in proposing solutions. This has a lot to do sometimes with the use of resources. So basically access to education, to healthcare, to economic opportunities. And I feel a lot of the hatred that we see among groups, yes, it is because of negative stereotypes, but at the root we have a lot of inequalities. So if we have public policies that address those inequalities in the less, I mean, everything is ideological, but in the way that different groups can propose solutions. It's a very hard question, but I feel is through the dialogue and an equitable management of our natural resources and access to rights. Yes.
Yes, actually, I have a question for you. To do an example from the country I'm in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Here, it's mainly to do with the refugee problem. Like you can see the refugees, the migrants basically, in the street. And a lot of people feel sorry for them. but like build like connection. But then there is, I guess you can say, it was before a minority, but now it's more of a majority of new migrants that are coming and causing more problems, like increasing crime, causing attacks to people. And this is increasing like the fear and resentment of the migrants in the country, and I'm sure other countries in Europe as well. So do you have any idea what can be done to sort of like basically build a better image?
Yes, first, okay, there are different levels. At the, let's say, at the discursive level, yeah, let's say when you connect migrants with crime, I would wonder what is the reality, is in the sense that how many are the ones that commit crimes and which kind of crimes. So if it's that's them, because if you connect the two, it can be very explosive. So if you look at the numbers, I don't know about the situation in Bosnia. I can know about the situation in Spain. Yes, we had some issues in which a minority of the migrants community is involved in, for example, petty crime, right? Depending on the groups. So yes, that you have to address as a crime issue. But then you have to wonder why there is such a crime. So I think the response of integration of those migrants, the situation of those groups, has to be solved and addressed. There are resources, it's just sometimes the priorities on the use of the resources, at least in Western Europe. There are resources, it's just that they are not, in my opinion, used in the most efficient and effective way to address the needs of those migrants and have a broader migration discussion. So I would really challenge this connection between migrants and criminality. I would not deny it. I think it's an issue that is there. So you need to address it, through also police mechanisms, and work with the community to mitigate this idea that all migrants are criminals, because that can be very explosive and very, very dangerous, I feel. In the case of many countries, the integration process has not been easy, but there are signs, for example, in Germany, in which there was a recent report now in which many of the migrants could access education, or maybe they have not found jobs, but the integration process is happening. It's a very difficult process, but yes, I would just be very careful how you deal discursively with this relation. What are the real facts? And with the real facts, work on the root causes of that problem. But you have also criminality among the population in general as well. So, yes.
Thank you for answering my question. It seems we have no other questions. So I guess we can conclude the lecture. Thank you very much for attending as our guest speaker. As I mentioned before, we are going to post the recordings of these videos on our social pages and our YouTube account. So anyone who views it at a later time can ask their questions in the comments, and we will send that question to you, and we'll reply your answers to them. Once again, thank you very much. It was a very informative and very interesting lecture. And I thank everyone for attending, and thank everyone for asking their questions. And I hope our guest speaker answered all your questions appropriately.
Yes, thank you very much for listening, for commenting. And yes, please do send your comments, because these are very difficult, tricky issues, and the context might be a bit different. So I'll be happy to keep exchanging through emails. You have my email on the first slide. Thank you and all the best. And I hope you're all healthy and well and taking care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This concludes our meeting today. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much, Sami and all.